Okay, for people joining this live stream, this is a late breaking function in our neural net framework for version 12 of Wolfram Language. And it is a thing for taking a network. So what is the relationship between this and information? Information is what we would apply to a classifier function, right?
Right. So this is actually more analogous to classifier measurements and predictor measurements.
Okay, so if I, for example, just so I understand what happens here, if I were to say classify country flag, or what the heck is that?
Just a message because there's been a unexpected change. I mean, error bars have been depreciated, so it's going to be removed. I already have a
no problem. Okay, so then if I say information of this, okay, nice. Okay, that's good. That's cool, actually. Why does that mouse over have a thing that looks like a dead computer?
Because normally there's some hyperparameters, like it will list the options to the method. Let's say.
Yeah.
But in that case, I guess there's no option, so it's an empty data set.
Minor baguette.
Yeah.
Okay. So the other thing you say is analogous is what?
Well, no, this isn't analogous. So classifier measurements and predictor measurements are analogous, which, yeah, they're not analogous. They're the same, really.
So here you give a test set. Give the classifier a test set, and then it measures.
Okay, well, if that needed a test set, why didn't it have a caret in that case?
That's a good point. I don't know. I mean, the documentation is clear. It's automatic, right? It
should be.
Careting.
Unless that ... messed it up somehow. That would be a thing to go chase. Maybe Sushma could chase that.
Yep.
Okay. So let's understand what this thing is. You know, I really wish you wouldn't do this of combining these things in one line. We really don't do that. Can we please not do that here? Well, actually, I guess this is okay.
Sorry.
No, I guess it's okay, actually, in this case. But why don't you just put them all...
I guess it could be separated in two, like net equal, data equal, and then net measurements. Because net measurements is
set up the
setup and the first thing that we show, maybe separated.
Yeah.
So in a situation where you have a bit of preamble setup, do we do a text line? So this measure the accuracy part, that refers to after you've done the setup. So how do you split the text?
Oh, you just say setup? Okay, look, here's what I would do. I would say set up a neural net and training data.
Okay.
Test data, but yeah.
Okay.
Obtain? Is that okay?
Well, it's kind of set up because you've got this, you know.
Sure.
Okay, now you say measure the accuracy of the thing on the test data. Measure the accuracy of the network. Okay, so let me understand then what, okay, so we're going back. Carl Lang on our live stream says this is really useful functionality. That's good. Will it be possible to allow our own accuracy functions, e.g. mean IOU?
In fact, IOU is one of the, Jamie didn't get a chance to add this yet, but it is implemented, which stands for intersection over union, if anyone's wondering.
It is there.
IOU is already part of it.
Mean squared loss layer section.
Oh, just down a bit, Stephen.
Okay. Okay. Well, so what's the by the way, I really don't think we should say a capital N there. That's really minor.
What about the slant? Yeah. This seems a bit weird to me, but what was the reason for that?
Well, the reason is that that N is actually any number. So if you type top 5 accuracy, it's the top 5 accuracy.
Oh, you can't do that. Tally, you can't do that. You cannot do that.
Okay, how should we do that?
There's already a design for that in classifier measurements. It's accuracy, like, yeah, exactly. Open that. Exactly.
Yeah, so this...
Should we just do accuracy arrow N?
Yeah.
The problem with that is when we set up a complex measurement spec where there are multiple other options, we use an association. So we say measurement goes to the string measurement you want, and then we have the other options in that association.
I mean, I guess you could still put a rule. It's going to be a bit weird to have two rules.
Does rule... Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. But does it bind the wrong way? Is it bind left to right instead of right to left?
No, wait a minute. What is the case you're describing? You're saying, this isn't right. This isn't right. This isn't right. When you say measurement there, that's a dummy measurement, right?
No, it's not. No, that's the real string measurement. Because you're giving all this extra information, and then that spec there is the kind of measurement you want. You could complain, though, that spec there should be in a string, because most of these, until now, all of these were strings.
Well, okay, so the issue that you're saying is measurement. What you're complaining about is the case where you say measurement arrow, accuracy arrow 10. Okay?
Yeah, does that bind the right? Yeah, that's the question. Full form. Okay, it does. Yeah, we'll use that. That's fine.
Okay.
We've got to produce a key. Can the key be called top 5 accuracy?
What do you mean by a key? What?
When this gets dumped into, like, all the measurements you ask for, and not in this case, but in NetTrain, when you can ask the very same things in NetTrain as part of the training measurements option. So when you ask for those things, it generates a key that uniquely identifies that particular measurement in all kinds of places.
Oh, God.
I mean, you can look, the design is not straightforward, but can that key be called top N accuracy, top 5 accuracy, or whatever?
I mean, but let's look at what's used for here. Okay, so hold on. So first point is, okay, the first point here, what is training measurements now? So let me understand, is an option for NetTrain. So that's very weird that we have one thing called training measurements and one thing called net measurements. Okay, what is the analog of training measurements?
There's none.
Okay, I don't think this is the right name then, because this is an option, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in fact, somebody on our live stream is already confused about net measurements being an option. It's not an option, it's a function. And they're confused about how round measurements and validation measurements combines with net measurements. Right? So I think this is the wrong name. I mean, I don't think we can call this. I think measurements has to be like component measurements, and all these measurements things should not be options, right?
No, I see your point. So in that name, we've got to communicate that it's something you're requesting as part of the training process.
Okay, so predictor measurements, hold on. These are, so all of these things here.
Could be like tracked measurements or monitored.
That's a bugasaur. Is Sushma here? Or?
Yes, I am here and I will report it.
Okay.
Maybe with a monitor language.
Say what?
I mean, we have a bunch of monitor something.
Yes,
right?
I agree. So training.
And you're using prototype, right?
I am using... No, I seem to be using production head branch.
Okay.
From 3 days ago.
Measurements monitor. Or...
Hold on. You're talking now about the training.
Yeah, training measurements, how we could call it.
Okay, training progress function, training progress reporting. So what is the relationship of training? How does this relate? Let me look for training measurements here. To make. Okay, so when the training measurements are made, and this is a Jamie question, I suppose, when they're made, it's giving a bunch of keys that will be fed to the training progress function. Is that correct?
Yeah, there will be training progress function will have access to those keys. NetTrain has properties, which will include things related to these keys. And
okay, so then let me make a suggestion. Okay, we've got a thing called handler functions keys, which is an analogous kind of thing, right? Which says that specifies to which to apply handler functions. So this is saying which keys you should, which keys you should expose to feed to another function, which is, I think, what this is doing as well. Is that right?
Yeah, but I think its primary function is not to cook up some key values to feed to other functions. Its primary function is to actually plot the things that you asked for. So when you do NetTrain, you will see these things plotted. That's the way that most people will consume this data. Some people might also look at the history of these results afterwards, in which case they get it via a key, but it's not the main delivery mode of this.
Okay, so somebody suggested the monitor word, and I think the monitor word is a good word here. But let's try to understand when we have other monitors. Yeah, those are expressions.
Yeah, they're typically rule delayed.
Well, there's things like training monitor keys.
What about the word measure in active form?
No.
Measure sometimes.
No, that's even worse. It's an option. Well, I mean, other possible names, which I don't like very much, training monitoring.
And what about the sort of, I guess, a name we sort of already rejected, but training metrics? We rejected metrics, I think, because
because that would suggest the opposite way around. I mean, that suggests a thing that is being used to control, in my view. Well, it could be interpreted either way.
So the most form, which I think seems to me to be okay, is training reporting measurements.
I was about to say something similar. I mean, training measurements reporting, I was about to say.
That's the first I've heard of your next generation, Etienne.
Oh, yes, that's true.
Aye. The training, let's see. What do you suggesting?
Training reporting measurements?
No, we don't want to use the word measurements. We don't want to use the word measurements because otherwise we're going to get confused with all these other things which are actively making measurements.
Yeah, but this is actively making measurements.
No, I know that, but there are functions, okay? Rather than options.
I realize, yeah, I realize.
Okay, so what we've got, explain to me, what is training progress reporting? How to report it?
Yeah, that customizes, do you want it in a panel, in a printed to the command line, nothing, progress bar.
So what was the thing? Training progress?
By the way, this, I think, should be superseded by a more generic option at some point, maybe just called progress reporting, because I think it's going to be used in many other places eventually.
I agree.
It just says, like, show me a panel, or just show me a bar, or show me a print, or show me nothing, basically.
Yes, I agree. Okay, training progress function. Why doesn't this annoyingly have its way of going to, yeah, well, this is being fixed, of have a way to go directly to the documentation here.
Yes, that's
I
in
know.
progress. Yeah.
I know. Good
Okay.
work. Okay. Okay, so what is this relative to the training measurements? What does this do? Compare this with training measurements.
So training measurements says, tell me about accuracy and precision. So you just say training measurements, error, accuracy, precision, those two strings. And you get a whole lot of stuff from that. You get plotting, you get the histories of those measures over time,
Okay.
and so on.
What do you get for training progress function?
Well, that's a more active thing. Here's a callback to call with all kinds of details that I can pick, look at.
Wait a second.
Training progress.
How does it display the results of training measurements relative to how it displays the results of training progress function?
It does not. Nothing happens to the output of your function returns. Doesn't make a difference what your function returns. It's just there to look at things, print things.
Wait a minute. Wait. This function is supposed to take action. This training progress function can put up a dialog box with a smiley face in it and things like this. Is that the idea? What is the relationship? I don't understand the relationship between the training progress function and the training measurements, training progress option and the training measurements option.
So you might, so there are two things. There's training progress function and training progress reporting, okay? Training progress function is a general purpose callback. You could use it to save or store things, or, it's up to you what you use that for.
Okay, all right, okay.
Output doesn't matter, but training progress reporting is something different.
Right, that displays in some way, okay?
It displays in some way, and you can override the default panel that we provide. So you could display your own cool plots, and I've done that lots of times. I think you've seen me demo that feature.
Yeah, okay, all right, fine. Okay, now...
Anyway, will we be able to use the properties in training measurements in training progress function?
Yes.
Okay.
They appear in a particular key as subkeys of a key.
What's the key?
There are several keys because...
okay, so there are round measurements and validation measurements, and then that is telling you per round what these measurements are. Is that the idea?
Correct. And validation measurements is the same stuff, but on the validation set.
Okay. All right. Okay. So that name also is dependent on what we call this, right?
Yes. So hear me out on this. Here's a particular way to slice this, which would be to distinguish an abstract thing like accuracy, like the term accuracy, the notion of accuracy, from an accuracy measurement that's been made in conjunction with the net and data. So in the scheme, accuracy is the name of a measure, and the value 97% is a measurement.
Okay.
In which case, this is training measures rather than training measurements.
That, I think, is unbelievably confusing. So look, I mean, given what we're seeing, training progress measurements seems not completely crazy. I'm reversing myself a bit on using measurements as an option name, but I think if you see that and you compare that with net measurements, I don't know. What do you guys think?
It's clearer. I agree with that. It's pretty clear that it's...
I mean, it goes with the family of training progress function, training progress reporting.
Okay.
What do you think? I mean, but then it's got to go along with. So then training progress measurements would have round measurements arrow, and then these measurements here, right?
You've lost me.
Training progress function will have round measurements. And how do you do with training measurements to distinguish between the training set and the validation set?
So
that's the whole point. You're using training progress function arrow, and then in that you're using round measurements arrow something or other. Is that the idea?
yeah, round measurements is a key. The training progress function gets access to the super association of all these things in it. One of them is round measurements. Another one is validation measurements. Those are entire associations unto themselves that have all the keys, that all the measurements you asked for and their values.
Okay, but then training measurements is not needed. You can just always use training progress function. How?
No, because we got to know what to collect. It's expensive to collect some of these. So,
okay, so there's exactly the same issue as the handling function key, handler function keys.
Yeah, the reason I don't think it's the right frame for it is that the way people consume this is they want to see the stuff plotted. It's not so much about the keys.
Okay, so are you saying that the just setting what you're currently calling, what we're now calling training progress measurements, just setting training progress measurements arrow Scott pi, for example, will cause it to display Scott pi, whatever that might be, independent of you saying anything else? Is that correct or not?
As a function of time, yes.
Oh, and it will show both the training and the validation?
Mm-hmm. In the exact same way we show loss and error. So, Stephen, quickly do net train over Linnet MNIST in that shorthand that we've now documented.
Have we documented it?
We haven't documented the Linnet part because that's basically only useful for testing and for demos like this. But the MNIST part is worth documenting. Like Linnet is the only thing.
Why don't you document this? I mean, okay, so we're doing
first. Yeah.
Why
okay, so what?
Forever?
Library loading is something we'll optimize at the very end of this whole process.
Okay,
so that's error rate there.
Yeah. Now what do you want me to do? So now if I do the same thing and I say training measurements arrow.
Nothing more. You won't see any plotting. We haven't hooked up. The plotting is the last thing to be hooked up.
Okay. All right, fine.
But
by the way, also the autocomplete was missing on the training measurements right hand side. Okay, but
yeah,
so here I gave it training measurements, and what it seems to have done is remove one of those images.
Yeah. It won't do that in future. But what will happen is all these measurements will be, so like these will all be on equal footing. So currently error rate is kind of baked in 11.3, but in 12, error rate is on the same footing as accuracy, as Scott pi, as all of these things. So any of those things you ask for,
okay,
you will then get those things plotted live, and you can. I don't think we will show all of the things. I think we will probably have a flipper so that you can see, Etienne's cool classify thing where you can flip back and forth during the training process to see the plot that you care about.
All right. I think we should change this to training progress measurements.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to do it.
Okay.
Training measurements changes to training progress measurements. Rename. Okay. All right. Can you guys follow through on the renames for every place else that is affected by this?
Sure.
Do.
During the progress, that specifies measurements to make while training is in progress. I'm just trying to get the word in. What's that?
It's like when movies try to get the name of the movie into some of the dialogue.
I didn't know they did that. Okay. They to make while neural net training is in progress. Well, no, you can just say training. We're saying net train now. Okay, now let's go through these. So we're getting rid of this horrifying top N accuracy, right? So that becomes, I mean, you can do all of these, but that becomes accuracy arrow N. Let's see. Where do we have? What's that?
I think just top N accuracy would be fine.
What does that mean? Fraction of correctly classified examples, but then what does it actually mean? What does top N?
That means you relax what you call getting right, so that the correct answer is just in the top end guesses by the classifier.
Okay. Well, then, for goodness sake, let's say that, because somebody like me wouldn't know what this meant otherwise. So say what you want to say here. Fraction of examples in which the correct answer is in the top n.
Yeah.
Of the correct result in the top n. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Can we use that then for
in the error rate? Yeah, we just need to do it for error rate as well. But that's the same. We can
okay.
do that.
All right. Okay. I'm just
Now
going to put a stub in there.
Beta score.
I'm sorry?
We can use the same notation to add F beta score, which is the generalization of the F1 score for different weightings between precision and recall.
Okay. I don't know what that is, but it sounds like you do, so that sounds good to me. Okay. All right. So you'll add those things. Okay. So this is and we got to go change training. What was these? This was training measurements previously, and then we're going to go back. So
yeah.
Okay, that seems to only be on one page. And so you're saying training measurements, where would this be?
Right at the bottom. Yeah. Managing data and training. It's just like a dump zone there.
Do we want to have a separate page about this? This is an awful lot of things here.
It's kind of entire guide page.
Well, maybe. I mean, we should break up this page a bit anyway. But at very least,
yeah, you know what? We should have a guide page, and then we can also put things. Not that it'll make it a 12, but we can put things like how to enumerate the GPUs. You know, get information about the GPUs. CUDA could go in there. CUDA link.
Okay.
It's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea.
Okay, so now we've got. Where are we putting these functions like net measurements and so on?
Yeah, that's a good question. They need to cross-link to classifier and predictor measurements.
Well, I know that, but where would net measurements, net information, that's net representation. So here, what is this? Net train results object. Okay, but so here, shouldn't net measurements go in here? I mean, it goes along with net information for the net.
Yeah, it does go there.
Okay, so it goes down at the bottom of net operations.
Yep.
Okay. Oops. Okay, and the description is? What is the description?
Do we use ETC, that kind of thing?
Yeah,
we could say measure accuracy, etc. of a net.
Well, measure it relative to what? Measure the performance of a net. Performance of a net on a particular training, on a particular data set.
On test data. Let's encourage best practices here. We don't want people measuring the nets on the training data.
Right, measure the performance of a net on test data. Okay, I don't know why this isn't showing up with the correct 12 plus thing here there. Okay, all right, so now net measurements, which we still have to review a little bit, needs to point to, certainly that has to point to training. Okay, let's look at what this points to. Training progress measurements. Is that the right thing for it to point to there?
I think so. Yeah, it's very tight. It's its closest relation.
Okay.
And
What about
classifier
net
measurement.
information? Net information seems relevant to this. That's the static version.
Definitely,
Standard
but
version.
classifier information seems to be.
Why there isn't a classifier information anymore?
Sorry, classifier measurements. It's still there. We haven't depreciated it for.
Deprecated.
Yeah.
That seem relevant? Does information seem relevant?
Predictor measurements also.
Okay.
No, I don't think information is that relevant, honestly.
Okay. 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 So then in NetTrain, we are going to point to, I mean, a net model presumably should have, I mean, net measurements, wasn't net model relevant to this as well? Because this is the performance for the net evaluated on certain data. So isn't net model?
In the same way as net chain or net whatever, no?
Yes. I mean, I would have thought this is relevant, net model, net chain, net graph are all relevant to this.
But this could put that in any net function in the beginning. I don't think.
What do you mean in any net function? I mean,
Yeah, it's
no,
kind of a weak association. So we don't do that. Yeah.
Sorry, what? We don't do that where?
No, we could put net chain and net graph because they are very common heads from nets. We could put that in all net associated functions, but we don't generally. So.
Well, I know, but in this case, the issue is you're applying the net measurements to an existing. It's not only training. You can do this. If I've got a net model, look, I think we should at least put net model in there.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, because it's something that you can apply to an existing net model. I mean, I could presumably say, if this is actually ran on my machine, net model of the Lynette training set, what its accuracy is. So in fact, can I see that? Could you just run that just so I understand what's going on? I can't run it. Is that correct? I don't have this.
I don't think you have this. Maybe Jamie can do. Maybe Jamie can do this. I can try as well.
Sure.
Let me know when you're set up. Are you set up yet or not?
Give me a sec.
Okay. All right.
I can do it.
Okay. Ready? All right. Go for it.
Yeah. Sure. Let's see. There's a net, and then we say net measurements of net on MNIST. That's not documented, but it just works by virtue of shared code.
Okay, so let me just see.
And then I have to give like accuracy or something.
Okay, so that also raises the question why they didn't give a caret.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so what is, and let's try recall there, for example. By the way, I think the term computing measurement is very odd.
Okay, what should we say?
Well, it's either making a measurement.
Measuring.
Measuring net performance. Or collecting measurement data. How about collecting measurements? Collecting measurement data.
Yeah, that's good. Because not everything is performance related.
Right. Is it going to have a dot at the end of that? I don't really know what. I forget what the format is there.
It should have dot.
Okay. So first of all, in the examples of net measurements, I really think you should give this like first there, because it's a very simple use. You don't have to set up this whole elaborate training set. Maybe you did give this first, but I think you should just say net measurements of net model, the net, blah, 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 comma, that thing, comma, accuracy.
What we can do is we can, in fact, let's do that and then put a divider, and then we can do the setup for a more complicated example and then repeat the same.
Right, exactly. Okay. That's nice.
Is this, I don't want, do we want to document this? I suppose we can.
It's kind of blah. I mean, just put resource data of that. It's nobody's going to be upset by saying resource data of that.
And then it's also clear that you're talking about the test version of MNIST. because there's test and training.
Oh, okay. Well, fine. So run that then. Run what you have there.
It's a bit slower because resource data is a bit slower.
Well, you have to. Why was there a differently configured? Okay, beautiful. Okay. All right, unshare then. Okay. Okay, so we've got some knitting to do here. We've got to look at the actual net measurements thing. So wait a minute. We've got here, we've got training measurements becomes training progress measurements.
Correct.
Does anything else need that?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
I'll go through and look at various places and make sure.
Okay. Okay, so this then after net train needs presumably at the end of this, actually net train, okay. So at the end of that we should mention net measurements, right?
Yeah, I suppose we should, because it is now, yes, it is now the kind of net branded way to measure.
Should we not mention net information here, or should we not bother with that?
We could, certainly, yeah, because it'll acquire weights and then you can see how big the weights are or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Remember, why does net information exist? Why isn't it just information?
Are we deleting all of the information functions?
Yes, we are. Well, I don't know whether we're doing it all for 12, but
I mean, I'm happy to delete that, but
does information work in the same way that net information works?
Probably not, because that hasn't come up on my radar. But I'm sure a bug will be filed, or we'll file a bug now.
Maybe why don't you file it now? I mean, Etienne, you're the guru of this whole information function applied to these things.
No.
You're not.
Not the guru.
I mean, I can have Tali and Nick talk to each other, but probably not for version 12.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sushma, can you then note that this needs to be?
Yes, I've already noted. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, let's go back here. So now we need.
So, by the way, with the new question mark syntax. Oh, sorry to interrupt. A little bit of a delay.
No, are you segueing into something totally irrelevant, Tally?
No, I'm just asking about information. So with question mark, the new question mark. Yes. If you had a chain, like could you say question mark of net, or would it see that as a static symbol and go, I don't know what net is? Do you know what I mean? If you said net equals something, and then later on you did question mark of net, like how is information supposed to work on expressions that already exist rather than symbols?
Question mark isn't information anymore, I think.
Question mark is a slightly modified version of information which doesn't evaluate, for example.
So can it, if you had a model...
If you say XXX equals 67 or something, and I say question mark XXX, if what you're asking is, there it is.
So if that was a net, it's not gonna, what would it do? It wouldn't give me information about the net, would it?
No, but if you type information...
That's an interesting idea, Tally. That's right. So what Tally is saying is, if you say question mark, that's actually not a bad idea, right? That if the value of XXX is a net, right? That's what you're saying. If the value of XXX is a net, for example, if I say XXX equals net model, MNIST, for example, why doesn't it autocomplete?
The net.
Oh, I'm confused. That's why it didn't autocomplete. Okay, fine. And then I say question mark XXX.
Okay, that's kind of not very useful, but it could be quite useful because it could just delegate the information to the value of XXX and show that,
Well, I don't think that's not useful. I think that's useful. I think the question of whether it then recursively goes and gives you the information on this is an interesting idea that hasn't come up before. Okay? I'm not going to... I think Itai is the keeper of the whole information story.
Yep.
So why don't we? Well, why didn't that work? Oh, because it's net information. So this is bad. That should work. That should really, really, really work.
I'm sure I can hook that up easily. It just hasn't come up on my radar, but I will.
Okay, hook it up, and then we can expect to deprecate net information.
Sure.
And by the way, this presumably should not produce a caret there.
Yeah, I don't know why that does that. But I'm curious, by the way, how do we document what the properties are for something like a net if there's no symbol called net information anymore?
In net graph, net chain, huh?
Yes, that's right. What we decided recently is information will delegate its documentation for subcases to the functions that are being informationified, so to speak. So, for example, for a graph, it'll be graph that says what information does on graph, so to speak.
Is there a special section for that, or is it properties and relations?
Well, that's a good question. It's part of the details. But the question of how we show that, it's a really good question. Where do we show it in the examples? Humph. Well, I think it depends how important it is. I mean, it could go.
Just take a quick look at net. Take a quick look at net information. I mean, my concern specifically about net information is that because it was its own little domain, there's all kinds of cool stuff there that might be as long as, and like it can work on any net. So like, would we replicate all of this in every layer? That doesn't seem right to me.
Well, you're talking about how the documentation works. Look, ultimately, okay, so listen. For 12.1, the idea is to have, just like we have format pages, okay? We're also going to have information pages that are the descriptions of this stuff for, information about different categories of things. So that's where we can share that information, share the description of the parameter, the properties for that information thing.
I see.
Okay, so Sushma, that's some unscrambling for you to do there of what has to happen with this. Okay, all right, so let's come back here. All right, I'm sorry, let's go back. We were net measurements, which we still haven't discussed fully. And net measurements certainly points to net progress measurements, training progress measurements, that's fine. All right, we got some questions on the live stream here. Okay, hold on. How does the third argument of net train? No, that was confused. Okay. How can he? Carl is asking, how can I add my own accuracy functions in general? What's the answer to that? So, in other words, their own measurements. What happens if you just give a pure function here instead of a name here in net measurements? Whatever you could measure here, you could just evaluate the function to compute that. But the question is, if you wanted in training progress measurements, how do you put it in there?
So what will be the input?
Is the question how to specify user-defined metrics?
That's correct.
So we support that as long as that measurement can be calculated in the computational graph. So if you can define it using graph operations, using our layers.
So where do you put that in?
Well, in the net itself.
And then that's what that net port syntax is.
For which? Oh, here. Oh, I see. The value of an output port. I get it. Okay, so I see. Okay, so you're going to give examples that show that. Okay, fine. So you actually compute it. The network itself computes it, is basically the point you're making.
For now, yes. And that is obviously more limited. It's not, I mean, there's still a lot you can do with that. But it's more limited than what you can do by providing some arbitrary function. We do want to eventually support an arbitrary function as well.
Okay, fine. Okay, question here. Is learning rate a top-level option to net train now?
It is, yep.
Okay. All right. If you're talking about performance of a net, is there a measurement for speed of execution in net measurements? That is an interesting question.
That is a cool one. That actually occurred to me and Jamie recently, and we realized we should probably support that kind of thing, kind of metadata type measurements. That's an obvious one. I don't know if others. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think things like what the length of the, I don't know what the analog of the, the length of the neuronal path, so to speak, from input to output, if that means something. Certainly does.
Well, that would be a static measurement. I think we have that. It's called like depth or something.
Well, it's not listed here.
No. It's a static thing, so it doesn't depend on the data. That's something like net information, rather than net measurements.
Okay, hold on. Things which are in net information should also presumably be supported in net measurements, correct? I don't see any reason not to.
Because
doesn't it seem useful to be able to make a measurement that just happens to be a constant?
It could be.
I mean, it seems silly to have two functions that you have to call if you're just generating a list of things for the network. Like you might want to say the error rate. You might want to make a table of error rate versus layers, for example, for a bunch of networks.
Yeah. I see the use case. Well, then I think the way that we should support that is just to have a note that says all options and net information are also supported, and not to like belabor it with another table.
That's fine. Okay, but now let's come back to, so there's the possibility of actual speed measurements, which I think would definitely be useful. People would really care about that. Of course, ultimately, what they really want to know is if you were to deploy this thing on some other platform, how would it, with some random TPU or some other weird thing like that, what would happen? That's going to be harder to do.
There's something related in information. So if you do information of a classifier, it probably doesn't work with a built-in classifier, but if you train a classifier, like you do classify whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4 goes to 1, 1, 2, 2, let's say. Or you can take an example from documentation as you want.
Well, why don't I just do random integer 10, 10, arrow. This is going to be brilliantly trained.
Yeah, random thing.
Okay.
You may not even be happy because anyway, okay. And then if you do information on that, actually it kept inside an example, and it did some benchmarking, single evaluation. So it did on your computer. So if you export this to another, training time.
Training time. Wait a minute. Single evaluation time.
Exactly. If you give one example to the classifier, it will take about 3 milliseconds to run on your computer. And if you give a batch of example, it will typically do 74 examples per millisecond on your computer.
Yeah, it's
not on the training computer, on the one that the classifier is
being run on right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the analog of that? So that's really nice. So I don't quite understand why information or net information then wouldn't be the place to put this. Yeah, in fact it is, because it's not. It's independent of the test set.
Yeah.
Better be independent of the test set.
Actually, not necessarily.
I agree. It could be a different number
for text. Variable length examples. It will take much longer. Like a recurrent network would run much longer and longer.
That's true.
Good.
But look, this is clearly a really nice thing to be able to have for net information, which a net information. It would be great if you could look at grandfathering in what's in net information into information, even for 12.0, just because we want to have a consistent story for information. People won't find net information.
Okay.
Sure. But you can leave the documentation for net information.
Okay. I assume there's some internal API that I just hook into.
Yes, supposedly. Yeah. I haven't seen it with my own eyes, but
actually, I did speak metric for cluster measurements as well, I believe, right? That could be net measurement as well.
I want to add
timing related properties. Yes. Evaluation time, batch evaluation time, yeah.
I do want to do that stuff. I think that the evaluation time is a slam dunk net measurement. I mean, yeah, there would be, it's basically time per example, I think is the right unit, because the batch size is could be selected at random.
What happens if I just say classify measurements, without giving a parameter here?
It will give a classifier measurements object.
Okay, so why we should show that? We should show that in the documentation early on. Because this is, I mean, if I just say, okay, so if I just do this, oh no, that's not useful. Oh, I see. It doesn't give a nice.
Yeah. No,
what is the analog? Okay, so hold on. Net measurement.
You can do a report.
Yeah, I think it should do something like this. I think this should display like this. Yeah,
actually it exists a report, but I didn't hook it, so it looked, in the. So if you do report of that, percent and then
key.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, report. And this is something probably that should go directly into the.
Yes, except that's unbelievably ugly. Why is that so? I mean, for goodness sake, don't make that so big in this case.
Yeah.
Why don't you just ask design to give you a spec? They've done this a zillion times before for these things. There's a spec for how to get this to not look stupid when there's that little data in it.
Yeah, true.
Okay, but so what is this actually returning? So I mean, classifier measurements. I hope we don't have a net measurements. What does net measurements of 2 arguments return?
We don't support that. We could and we could return a net measurements object.
Oh no, for goodness sake, not that, not another object. No.
What would you want that to be?
Well, I don't know. What does information do? Information, I believe, is just what is the input form of %34? Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay.
So that's just type set stuff.
Yeah. But you cannot reuse it after to query properties, so probably why they didn't care about what it was.
Okay.
But
well,
I think
arguably,
everything at some point.
Yes, and arguably there should be sort of an information object or something that is the display.
Because that display thing, you should be able to query the keys of that. Like if you've got that information object and you ask for accuracy, surely that should work.
Yes, I agree completely. So I think it should be an information object, and that's how that should be packaged. Sushma, that's for you again.
Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to check. I think we already do that, but let me check that.
Well, it doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, okay, if I say %34 sub.
It might just be for my stuff, huh?
Yeah, because yours, yeah.
No, I don't think it's right there. Okay,
yeah.
So if I say information of, let's say Italy or something, then I should be able to get the entity information thing. And now if I say that, yeah, so that works. So there's a goof up somehow in yours, Etienne.
Yeah, it just means that, yeah.
What's with the code font?
What's that?
What's with the code font in like full data set?
It's wrong. It's an error.
Yeah, it's coming tomorrow. All the fixes are coming tomorrow.
Okay, I'm not trying to complain.
Okay, so hold on. So let's zoom out for a second on this stuff. Okay, so Etienne, there's this problem that you should be using information data. Tally, there's let's try to get rid of net information. If we can actually get rid of it, that would be great, and just fold it into information. But at least we should make sure information has that functionality. Okay, and it should return an information data object that has the right properties. Okay. Okay, sure. Let's go back to.
And by the way, this information data object seems like a good general purpose carrier for things like the measurements, right? Once you've got the measurements, if you do the 2arg form of measurements.
Yeah, why not?
Yes.
You
don't have to decide this now, but it seems like it's the same notion of a bunch of keys and it displays nicely.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree.
One
Okay,
thing,
yeah.
for the classifier measurement reports, should it look like this report? I mean, when you just do classifier measurements, okay, 2 arguments. So you have the classifier measurements object. Should it look like, which type of blob should it look like?
One of these. I mean, sorry, as opposed to what? By
As
the way,
opposed to
something is
something
wrong
that
with
is,
your font sizes here. Your font sizes seem to be too large.
So
Yeah.
what we are doing with classified information is we are just, getting whatever Etienne had done so far.
All right, fine. Okay, so this is a 12.0 hack.
Yeah. And I think for next release, we will clean it all up.
Okay, all right, fine. I mean, if he has the chance,
Yeah.
he could go down in font size, but don't do it if it's going to break something.
Okay, yeah, no, I can do it. I can do that. Yeah, so as opposed to something classifier measurement and then open bracket, and there is a panel inside, with a plus, like NetChain does. Like, you see what I mean?
Yeah, I understand. Isn't there a way with information of having a plus? I thought information had a way to expand.
I mean, this is for
Information, if it
information.
doesn't, it should have. Okay, so for certain kinds of things, when you get information, there will be above the fold stuff and below the fold stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Sure,
Like
and what
we
about
do for
measurement?
symbol.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So look, Etienne needs to be shown the API for the information thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was for measurements that I was asking, actually. It's a bit different.
Okay, but I think it's the same. It should be the same appearance. I mean, whether yeah, I understand that measurements will have something where you need to be able to go below the fold as well. The
thing is, for measurements, it's okay. For information, the main use case is you just see the report.
Yes.
And if you want a specific property, then you use information directly. For classifier measurement, it's specific that when you do classifier measurement, there's a lot of computation that happens that doesn't have to be repeated to ask for several properties. So it's a typical workflow to first do classifier measurements with 2 arguments, and then you have this thing that you can ask, let's ask accuracy, let's ask error, let's ask F1 score, and it's a bit interactive what you can ask to it. So we need to make sure, like when I see a report like that, I don't think I can compute stuff from it. Whereas when you see a sort of blob, with a classifier measurement head, then it's a bit more clear that you can ask stuff to it.
I understand. If there's a plus in it, it will also be clear that you can go and ask more stuff. I get what you're saying. I still think we should standardize on this information thing. People will learn that you can, do sub-values of the information. It's only one thing to know, and it's very general because it's across all information blobs everywhere. Make sense?
Yeah, okay, for information, but for measurements.
No, but I'm saying if the blob looks like an information blob, people will assume that you can do sub-values on it because you can do sub-values on an information blob. Okay, let's take a few more things from the live stream here, and then I want to come back to going through the details of net measurements. Yeah, so someone's asking here, will this eventually be rolled into a single measure model measurements or something, rather than having all these classifier measurements and predictor measurements and net measurements?
Yes, we do want to do that.
Okay. Random question here about being able to do net train on an AMD GPU. I'd like to know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's something that's up to AMD. They do have a. Look, Sebastian is the big expert on this. I haven't followed the details closely, but I do know the rough story, which is that there's been this. Intel has CUDA and AMD has OpenCL, and that's historically been this kind of schism of frameworks. And OpenCL has completely died. Like for the point of view of deep learning, it's not kind of in action in any of the major frameworks. It's not a contender. But AMD has been switching to, I think it's called ROCm, which is a kind of new sort of update that does put them back in the running with deep learning. And I think that is being ported to the various frameworks, and I don't think it's landed. If it had landed, we would be definitely using it. But it's not something that's in our control to do. It's a move by the principals themselves to kind of add that support for the major frameworks. As soon as the frameworks support them, we will support MD cards.
Right. Okay. Oh, this is an interesting suggestion. Perhaps add GPU profiling through a network to our benchmark suite. That is an interesting idea.
Yeah, that's fun.
Gosh, where does that go? I mean, the benchmark thing needs to be updated anyway. If nothing else, that is a good student project to try and find some appropriate things to do there. Sushma, perhaps you could remind me and I'll add it to that list. But
Okay.
in addition, if you know who is doing the update to the benchmark stuff, that will be somewhere in our nodes area.
Yeah, that is what you mentioned last time. So I will also send this to our node.
It's good that I'm predictable, repeatable. Okay. Okay, nice box would be great for nettrain results object. What does nettrain results object do now?
I think it looks okay. You can always make things look better, but if you go to the doc page, you'll see what it looks like.
Yeah, it's rather nice, actually.
I mean, we could certainly make that into a more information-y interface because it's very similar. It's just property lookups.
We should do that, I think. But why is this nettrain? What is this doing? Why does nettrain? I mean, nettrain normally just returns a network. What is this? This is some kind of hackosaurus with that third argument all.
No, I mean that's documented and you approved that.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
that was an 11.3 thing. But can I say something? I do think that this should be the default that nettrain returns rather than the train to net, because then at that point you've thrown away so much useful information. I think it's worth asking people to dig out the trained net. And
that bridge has already been crossed for the function called nettrain. We can have another function. Anyway. All right, fine. Well, I'm not thrilled with this. I would like to revisit this when we've cleaned up all the information stuff. Revisit how nettrain results object works. Okay. Nice to see a temporal breakdown of where the bottlenecks are in execution, plotted across various batch sizes.
I mean, that's a fun one. So that would be like benchmark, like kind of profiling the net. So like saying this layer is responsible for most of those tools are starting to exist in MXNet. So we definitely have the ability to track that information back from MXNet to Mathematica. It's quite a lot of work to do. We haven't had a chance to do that for this version. It might be something we do for the next version.
And that would show up where?
Net measurements would be the obvious place to do it because that's where you get data.
All right, our final act here is to actually go through net measurements, right? Unless somebody else has something else that's piled. Let's look at net measurements here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we say computes the requested measurements? Because that's got to do some work.
Sure.
Okay. A measurement can have any. Private output port. The net.
We should delete that third usage. Sorry, that was copied across from training. Yeah, training. No, wait, the one with the weight. So for training progress, you do want to see like, oh, the weights the magnitude of the weights is changing. But for net measurements, it doesn't change. So obviously, that's a stupid thing to ask for. You can ask for it, but it's not useful to point out.
This one here, the weights.
Yes, the weights.
Are the same as those for the additional settings, are the same as those for training progress measurements.
Yeah.
I would prefer, I hate using these things where oops. So wait a minute. So wait a minute. So the first thing is that net measurements, all properties from net information can also be used as built-in measurements. Is that correct?
Yes. Hypothetically, if we did remove net information for this version, what would that sentence read?
From information of net.
Okay.
And so, Sushma, you'll need to search for net information if we succeed in doing that. Okay, for nets that contain cross-entropy layers, I was going to say this thing. So wait a minute, but what about nets that don't have either of those things? What can you do with this?
You can do the net port. So, I mean, the way it breaks down is that for nets that contain cross-entropy loss layers, so cross-entropy loss layers is kind of what makes a net into it's how you train a classification net. So that what distinguishes a net that is going to be used for classification. But a net can be used for both classification and for prediction. Mean squared loss and mean absolute loss are used for prediction as well.
Okay.
We need to remove the top end stuff, and
yes, yeah, you guys need to do that. So that's
I'll do it.
By the way, I suggest a syntax that when you do net port, you can actually put a rule, and net port rule, and then you put a pure function that will basically apply to all the results. Like
That's
net
a great
port.
idea. I really like that.
Okay, then that would more or less solve the problem of being able to get an arbitrary function evaluating stuff on the network. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it would be part of a solution, but net measurements itself doesn't, there's no place you call the net inside net measurements. So it's related.
All right, let's have a quick read through the rest of these. Area under ROC curve.
This is already stuff in classifier measurements, so
I see. Okay, fine.
Kind of,
everything here has been gone through. Is that true?
There's a few new things. False omission rate is new. It will be in classifier measurements as well. We have to put it. All the other ones that you're reading right now are there already.
Okay.
Oh yeah, and fraction. Yeah, this stuff are new. Fraction variance and explain are new. Intersection over union are new. And R squared is new.
Okay, looks reasonable to me. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a longer name for R squared?
It's usually correlation, right?
Call it coefficient of determination.
Wait a minute, is it the R squared, lowercase r squared, that's the thing used by all bad statistics things?
You're confusing with p-value, no?
No. I'm talking about the R squared, which is where people say, I've got an R squared of 0.9, a correlation between this and that with an R squared of 0.9. You know, okay, it's the correlation coefficient.
Yeah, I think
it's not the correlation coefficient. It's the coefficient of determination.
I'm perhaps confused. There's a thing called R squared that you compute.
Yes, it's also known as coefficient of determination.
But I mean, I'm trying to.
Actually, they say R squared is okay. I think in some case R squared is simply the square of the sample correlation coefficient.
Yes.
Oh.
But I mean, is that what this is, or is this something different?
This is something different.
Okay, then we got to say what it is, because I at least am confused. What is this?
No, I think it's the same thing, Stephen. Maybe it's generalization, because in Wikipedia I can see one intercept is included, then R square is the square of the correlation coefficient. So maybe in the linear case, it's what you call it's the square of correlation coefficient, but
Okay.
for nonlinear prediction, maybe it's something different. I don't know.
I mean, Wikipedia also says at the top of the page for coefficient of determination, not to be confused with coefficient of correlation.
Oh. Which is...
Why don't we ask somebody in the statistics team so we actually get this right? No, this is... Okay, somebody... We're running out of time here, but I wonder if maybe Goshia K can... Let me see if we can get... okay, is there anything else we have to deal with here other than that? Wait a minute. The standard deviation is not the root mean square. If it's called standard deviation, why isn't it saying standard deviation of something? It's not the root mean square of the residuals. It's either the standard deviation of the residuals. I'm confused here.
No. No, here you're not removing the mean. So...
But you're saying the residuals have already subtracted out.
Yes, you're right. So it's not... Do we say that in classifier measurements? I'm surprised.
I'm fairly certain that's where I got it from, but perhaps I made a mistake.
Well, that would be predictor measurements, those second things, yes?
Yeah.
Oh, it's in predictor measurements, yes.
Well, that's what you said there.
Oh, yes.
Standard deviation baseline. Okay, I don't know what any of these things are. So I'm officially confused.
No, sorry. It is the root mean square. A square.
Yeah, because
it is. Once you've got the residuals, yes. If you've that is what it is.
Because you're modeling the residuals as a Gaussian, and you're asking what is the standard deviation of that Gaussian, but it has to have mean zero. That's the assumption.
Yeah, right. Because it's residuals.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't remove the mean, so it's fine. Now we could debate about the name standard deviation or not, because it's not a standard deviation of the residual. That's very important.
No.
It's the root mean square of the residuals.
It seems like the wrong name to me.
But what other name? Because that's I remember. Yeah.
What about root mean square? Because you've already got mean square, which is the mean square of the residuals, and so literally just
if you said residual mean square.
No, it's just called mean square for the mean square of the residual. So yeah, we could call it root mean square as well. Yeah, but it's a bit technical. Standard deviation people understand. I don't know.
I think we're not going to solve this problem right now.
Yeah.
And we don't seem to be able to find the most obvious person from the statistics team, though there are several others. I think it will be worthwhile for you guys to spend a few minutes with the statistics folk and just go over these. Does that seem reasonable?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Did we knit everything here correctly? Let's go back to classifier measurements. Does it refer to net measurements?
Probably not.
It does not.
We have not. We don't knit until you approve the name. Otherwise, we.
Okay. All right. Okay. So where should we? So what we net measurements probably wants to be pretty early in that list.
After classifier, or after, I don't know.
What's
After
classifier
classifier?
information doing here? Classifier information doesn't even exist anymore. It's just information, right?
No, it still exists. We haven't deprecated it yet. We should.
We need to make a decision how that's going to work. Okay, so then this should say, okay, so somebody, Gosha will join us. Okay, so then we should say net measurements somewhere here. Where should we say that?
I would suggest after classify.
Arguably, next to predictor measurements.
Yes, it should be after predictor measurements. I think that's the right place. It's less important than predictor measurements. Yeah.
Okay, so that's classifier measurements. Now we need to have predictor measurements.
Yeah.
We'll refer to classifier measurements, and then this will come after that. Okay, question from our live stream. Will the revamped loss function option be ready for 12?
It's my sincere hope that it will be, because I think it's super important for ergonomics of all kinds of things.
Right. In fact, I believe we have a meeting tomorrow, currently on the calendar for 3 Eastern, about loss function.
That's correct.
It might be nice to give exact formulas for the definitions of the measures. I agree, or some pointed to where they're defined. Yeah, well, I mean, I think ultimately we should have some kind of tech report that describes all of these things in more detail. We just have to have time to make it. Okay, what other knitting do we have to do here? And I guess Gosha was going to join us, so we hopefully can get some input on this.
I am already here. Hello.
Okay. All right. We are looking at this net measurements function, and it has various kinds of statistics related things here, which we don't really understand. In particular, it has an R squared that is supposedly a coefficient of determination. And what is the relationship between that and the correlation coefficient, which is the usual Pearsonish R squared? Is that a reasonable question?
In a way, yes. It's. I don't know the exact the formulas, but we have this also in the linear models, and this is I think computed through the estimates. I don't recall the proper formula on top of my head.
But so in linear model fit, where would it be? So that some of these measures.
Yeah, in the AIC you see adjusted R squared and R squared at the last table here, properties that measure the goodness of feed.
Okay.
I think, okay, now I'm reading more. I think you say it is the square of the correlation coefficient only when the model is a linear regression.
Okay.
But
so
it can
this
be
is
defined in general for arbitrary model. Apparently, the formula, it's 1 minus the ratio of the sum of square of the residual and sum of square of just the data.
So it's basically the fraction of variance that is explained by the model, but 1 minus that, the remainder, right?
Yeah, variance of the residual divided by variance of the data, and 1 minus that.
Okay, so what you're basically
so you notice
saying,
on the left we've got, yeah.
So you're saying we should change this description to be coefficient of determination. Is that right? I mean, that would be the consistent thing. If you say mean square of the residuals and so on. Well, okay. Can you so Gosha, your linear model fit must also have things like mean square of the residuals somewhere. Is that true, or is that not true? Well, look, here it says studentized residuals, for example. This is fairly confusing, but let me just understand. Net measurements is making the goodness of fit measured by net measurements is the same kind of a thing as a goodness of fit measured for linear model fit. There should be some analog of net measurements for a linear model. What is it? Or is it in the linear model object itself?
It seems to be.
In the linear model object itself.
I mean, linear model fits, you can see.
Well, you got fit. That's right under your cursor there. And with that, I mean, you can get the other things, I guess.
Right, but so I'm just trying to understand. In the case of net measurements, and for Gosha's benefit, this is not a static measurement on a network. This is a measurement with respect to certain test data. Okay? Whereas for linear model fit, there should presumably be a similar notion. You've got a fit, and the question is, how good is that fit on particular test data? Is that true?
I think it's only on the training data, the linear model fit.
Yeah, I understand. Did we lose Gosha? Or
no, I mean, I don't know what the net measurements are actually doing. So I know the linear model fit, you can find the residuals between your model and your data. So what you expect and what you have, and I just don't know what we have here.
Okay, let me go through what I was just saying again, because I see whether I know what I'm talking about. So for linear model fit, you have certain data.
Yes.
And you are finding a fit to that data.
Mm-hmm.
And you are then asking, and the fit you have found is a model. And you can then ask, with respect to that data, which we could refer to as training data, how good is your fit?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, in the case of net measurements, there are what you traditionally do with neural nets is you use one training set and one test set. What it sounds like you're doing, yeah, I mean, for a neural net, basically you're trying to perfectly fit the training set. Whereas for a linear model, you know that a linear model cannot perfectly fit the original, the data, unless the data happens to be, linear in some sense, right? So in the neural net, the conceit of the neural net is with the right training, you can perfectly fit the training data. Therefore, there's no point in doing a goodness of fit to the training data. It's only a point in doing goodness of fit to a validation set or a test set. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, because and in fact that's and the sort of the way to say it in the sort of textbooks would be nets have such large capacity, or can have such large capacity, that you kind of guaranteed to overfit if you train for a significant amount of time.
Yes.
And in that situation, it's not interesting to see how well it does on the training data.
Exactly.
But linear models are like so low capacity that you don't worry about overfitting.
Exactly.
In linear models, I imagine.
Actually, they would overfit as well. For example, if you have many features, you would overfit as well. But I guess historically in statistics, it's low dimension. And so I guess that's why this problem of overfitting was less important. And
right, but so there isn't so a question for I don't even know what it means to have. I mean, there isn't an analog of a test set for statistics, right? For linear model fits and things. It's just.
I mean, in the community, yes, we don't have it in our language.
There is an analog. Okay, so walk me through
comes from
the analog of. What's that? No, what is the analog of net measurements for the standard? I mean, by the way, a good question, which I don't think we've really addressed, is the analog for our fitted models, right? Fitted model is a thing which, by the way, what does fitted model, how does fitted model work? Do you apply fitted model to data to get something? Is that how it works? Fitted model of that. Oh yeah, that's right. So that the fitted model, you give it the data and it gives you the value.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like an interpolating function. Why is it called fitted model, not fitted model function?
Because it has more properties, I think.
See.
Like you can see, then apply the fitted residuals to the model, so it stores more things.
Yeah, okay, fine. You might feed it a picture of an ostrich or something, but in a simple net model, you might just give it a list of 3 numbers, which is analogous to what you would give fitted model here, is a list of 3 numbers. Just because these linear models don't exactly deal with pictures of ostriches and so on. Okay. Well, all right. So a question here is with respect to these measurements on neural nets, to what extent should they correspond to the measurements that you can do on a linear model? Right? And the answer seems to be there are measurements for the linear model that are direct analogs of the measurements you do for the neural nets. Because the quotes residuals, what is a residual would be the difference between what you should have got and what you actually got. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, I mean, mean prediction errors is actually directly what we just call error, right? Oh no, okay, that's what we call mean deviation in that case. Oh no, standard error, okay. That's actually the question we're wondering, how to call standard deviation. Well, they seem to call it, or maybe I'm confusing. Prediction errors, standard errors for the mean predictions.
But wait a minute, is that prediction of the mean? Or is that the mean error?
I don't know. Gozia, do you know?
I mean, I'm sorry because I am not aware how you measure. What are your residuals, and what's what's the measure between for your residuals in the way, right? So what we have, we have the differences, so the residuals between in linear model fit between the data points and what the model values gives us, and we have values, and then we can square them. Add them, find the mean, and such. And that would be corresponding to, you have some residuals, I understand. Here, yeah. I don't know between what and what. I just don't know.
It's the same. It's right? Between the true value and the predicted value. So it's the same.
Right. So that will be the kind of the same thing. So you have your residuals, and then these are the differences, and then if you use if you square them or you standardize them, you have kind of the same idea in that way, right? But the point is that when you look at the differences, you want to square them, so your errors always are positive and they don't cancel if you add them, right? So hence the mean square. So you might want to find the mean of your squared residuals, for example, that in that way.
So the mean of squared residual, where is it in this table?
I don't know where it is. I'm just talking on top of my head right now.
Okay, but you think there is it's somewhere here. Are you calling residuals as errors?
So mean predictions.
Yes. It's probably single prediction errors. No, the equivalent of standard deviation.
We have a question from the live stream, there's a reasonable question, which is, wouldn't it be nice to have measurement functions like this that can just be run on labeled data independent of classifiers and nets?
Yes. That should be another function. I think all of this will merge in two functions. I mean, all of this will merge in one function, probably called model measurements. And then there should be another function that is independent of a model, where you just give true data, predicted data, and you compute stuff. We don't have a good name for that yet. And we need to figure out and put that into.
Right, but so that could be merged between the statistics functions and these functions.
Yes, I mean, doesn't take even model measurements. You should be able to put a linear model fit or whatever you want in it.
But there are lots of models, right? You were aware of that. That linear model fit is just one of them.
Sure,
and
but
there are there are more fitting functions. There's also time series model fit and such, and they have a little their own kind of flavors and their own things.
Maybe it's going to be harder than we think to merge that.
Well,
so what you would want the data and the model, but then how do you fit? How do you proceed? We know with modeling, it's another question. How do you produce? The ideal data from the model might differ depending on in which area are we talking about.
Yes, but okay, but it seems like there's a collection of functions that have quality of model measurements that we need to align, because right now we've got two different versions of this for the world of machine learning versus the world of statistics, and they seem similar but not quite the same. And my guess is that there will be particular kinds of things, whatever it is, the Cook distances, whatever those are, which might be specific to linear models and not relevant to neural nets, and something else. Right, but okay, this is a project we're not going to get done, obviously, for 12.0, but it seems like something where you guys should separately talk about this and see whether you can come up with some merged idea here. All right, anything else for this meeting? Oh, okay, so some small cleanup to be done, and Sushma has a to-do list for the future, and I think we're in good shape here.
Cool.
So thank you all very much. Thanks to folks on the live stream, and thank you, Gosha, for that drop-in on statistics.
Sure.
And okay, see you all soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.